Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Your Purpose podcast. We want to encourage you and hopefully inspire you every day to live on purpose. And hey, thank you so much for not just tuning in today, but being subscribed. And if you're not already subscribed, go ahead, do that wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as you can watch every episode on YouTube. Today, it's the brothers episode, me and Bryce. Bryce, people always ask which one of us is older, and I'm going to take that question as long as I can get it, which is great because I am older. Bryce and I, if you didn't know this, Bryce and I are exactly 4 years and 1 day apart in age. We had roughly the same birthday. We were supposed to have the exact same birthday, and then the doctor was like, no, they need to have different birthdays. So Bryce, November 16, me, November 15, and we were born in Sioux Falls. I was born in Sioux City, Iowa. Bryce born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And almost 8 years ago now, Bryce, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska. So crazy times. The first big move you and I really had ever made. And the only move, absolutely. Other than that, it was just moving, from house to house. And yeah. So Bryce and I are going to talk about a lot of different things today. We're going to talk about kind of just taking a huge risk and doing what we believe God was telling us to do. We're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about life. But I asked Bethany on the last episode, and go back and listen to the previous episode if you didn't already. Really good stuff with Bethany talking about homeschooling and parenting, things like that. But I just want to pose the question out there, Bryce. Do you feel like you're living your purpose right now, and why or why not?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Yeah. I would say yes, absolutely. And I would say predominantly because on a daily and or weekly basis, I have an opportunity to use what God has gifted me in, what he's made me passionate about, as a tool and a resource to either help present the gospel or to directly present the gospel, to create environments where people can encounter and experience the Holy Spirit, the love of God. And I get to do it not just through how we serve at church, but through my job as well. Work at a nonprofit here, nonprofit ministry in Omaha, Nebraska called Chariots for Hope. I'm the marketing director there. So really in all categories or major categories anyways of my life, I feel like I get to honor God and point people to him. And so, yes, absolutely.
Was there a point at which you felt like that clicked where you maybe didn't realize it, but didn't feel like you were living your purpose, and then where something just kind of the switch flipped? Or was that more of a gradual thing that you have to look back on to kind of even know?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say gradual. I don't really, I think we've talked about this before. I don't know if either of us really ever had this one aha moment, but I think gradually over time, for me, it was disassociating the quality of whatever I was putting out with the value that God saw in what I was doing. And so for a lot of years, even like when, back when we were working at a church in Sioux Falls and leading up to our move here to Omaha, the first handful of years here, I felt like I was waiting to like be fully in my purpose because we hadn't had like the size of worship team that we were looking at. We didn't have the size of church that I felt like God put dreams in my heart about. And so I say gradually, just because, even from back when we were living in Sioux Falls, I feel like God just, through experiences, through conversations I've had with people, through disappointments, through triumphs, whatever it might be, gradually over time, I really felt like God made a clear divide between the accomplishment of what we were getting done and the reality of living in his will. Because living in the will of God is not something that God is waiting for us to get to. He's not, or maybe that's a poor way to put it. I should say, we don't have to wait years in order to get where God wants us to be right now. it doesn't have to be even always, after we get a certain job or after we get out of our hometown or whatever. The reality is that purpose is lived when you're living in obedience day by day, in a moment by moment basis. And sometimes that's acting on moving to a new city for the very first time, and sometimes that's taking the trash out even when your wife doesn't see you doing it, just because you know that it's going to value her or whatever it might be. But
yeah, I think it's a great way to put it, and I was thinking on the way over here as we were getting ready to record this, I was thinking that a lot of what it feels like looking back to know that I wasn't living my God-given purpose versus now knowing that I am and being confident in it is I felt like a huge identifier is the self-realization that I was living to please people instead of to please God. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that you can know that you're in His will is when you know that you're actively trying to walk in obedience to Him, as opposed to, well, I need to do the songs on the weekend set that everybody wants us to play, or I need to, look like the top worship leaders in the way that I dress, or, these types of things. And it's just that comparison game that really kills when it comes to not just creativity, but really living out what you've been called to do specifically. And so, Bryce and I did grow up together in the same churches, obviously, and we've been around each other since, birth for Bryce. I wanted to kind of take a quick second, Bryce, to break the ice for people a little bit here who maybe, don't know this about us, but I'm wondering from your perspective, how many conversations do you think we've had in our lifetimes that didn't include a movie or a TV show reference?
I could probably count the number of conversations on one or two hands.
And what are the most, let's say, top 2 or 3 most quotable movies or shows of all time?
Oh man, if we're looking at the entirety of our career quoting movies,
yes,
I would say The Sandlot.
Yeah,
hits a top 3.
Yeah.
I would say The Office also reaches into that realm. Mm-hmm. Lately, it's been a lot of I Think You Should Leave.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of I Think You Should Leave.
Mm.
I'm not in trouble at all for mentioning that show.
Yeah. I was going to say Lord of the Rings and SpongeBob make regular appearances in our daily vernacular.
Which, ironically, Lord of the Rings is not, we don't quote it in a it's not a serious quotes.
No, it's always
type of category. It's
funny.
Yeah, it's pulled from meme culture.
Mm-hmm.
One does not simply.
Yeah. I think that's one of the funniest things, that when we get into conversation with other people and I try to pull out from my archives or my Rolodex of quotes or things that it's like, oh yeah, you get that. No, it's like most people don't get it, but it's fine.
We were just talking about this before we started the episode, but apparently Gen Z has given a term to SpongeBob fans. Such as us in our 30s, sponge boomers, those who predominantly appreciate or are loyal to the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants,
which I think is the correct way.
Yeah, we would be sponge boomers.
Right.
I wear that. I would wear that badge.
There's the occasional funny new episode of SpongeBob or funny cutaway scene or something that my kids watch that show and things like that. But so despite our pop culture consistently coming up into our vernacular, Bryce and I have also been doing ministry together for our entire lives. And when I say doing ministry, I almost cringe at saying that, because I feel like what people would consider to be doing ministry, I really just feel is what you talked about, is obedience. And the fact that we've gotten the privilege to be able to work at churches is really a game changer, in the fact that we've been able to pour our energy and pour our time into that, and dedicate ourselves to that. But that wasn't the case when we moved to Omaha, and I'm interested to know from your perspective what that whole process was like, because I have my whole spiel of like, Monty called me into his office. I talked with Pastor Monty about coming here, and I was thinking of ways to let him down easy, and then all of a sudden, God revealed that we were supposed to be here. What was that whole process like for you in terms of knowing that you were supposed to leave a job that you had, leave a role that you had, leave a church and a family and all these sorts of things to move and take that risk to come to Omaha?
Well, and a relationship, really at the pinnacle of our time deciding that we were going to leave. It's a big story, that the story of transition, but obviously for summarizing, I have a similar setup where Monty had pulled me into his office when we were all still working at Celebrate. And I, in the same way, I feel like I remember previously talking to you about it, where you had told me even, I got to find a way to like let him down easy type of thing. And I remember walking back to my office after he asked the same thing, and I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to as well. But it's funny. It's funny when you like deliberately tell God you won't do something, how like a lot of the time there's God's sense of humor is that he's actually pulling you towards that thing that you're saying no to. And that was the case for Omaha. I remember after, actually praying about it, or starting to, at first it was like, no, God, absolutely not. I've got a full-time job at a church that I've been at for 10 years. I am doing what I enjoy doing. I'm writing songs for the church. I was designing for the kids and youth, and because our friend Ryan Vanderbush, who was the lead designer at the time, had moved to Colorado in his own calling to be a part of a different church, I started designing everything for the church basically, and was playing more of a pivotal role than ever. And so I was like, absolutely not, God. Like, there's no way that you're asking me to do that. And I remember driving in my car, talking to him in that way, and almost hearing, not audibly, but hearing him say, who's the one directing your steps? Is it you or is it me? And so I thought, okay, fine. Like, I'll pray about it. I'll include it in my prayer time. And the easiest way to describe it is, like when you are either looking at a car to buy, or you do buy a car, all of a sudden you start seeing that car everywhere. And it was that for me with Omaha. I'd walk into our house, and like the TV would be on already because our parents were watching something, and Omaha, Nebraska would pop up. I remember walking into the coffee shop that I liked in Sioux Falls, and a guy that was a friend of mine had just happened to be there after living in a different state for years, and was like, what are you up to? And I hadn't even told anybody that I was praying about it at this point, but I was like, well, actually I'm praying about moving to Omaha for a church plant. And he's like, you're kidding me. Like, I'm literally moving to Omaha next month. It was Paul Menifee. And just more stuff like that came up. And I think that like the biggest resistance, maybe without going into all of the deep details, is that I was engaged to a woman that, for a while was wholeheartedly devoted to that calling as well, until our families butt heads, and her and I butt heads on a lot of big decisions. And, towards the tail end of my living in Sioux Falls, I remember like her thing, and this isn't a knock at her or anything like that, but she wanted us to start in a different city where there was no family. And, because she wanted us to figure out who we were as a couple before whatever it was. And I remember, hearing that from her and having that conversation, and then telling her, if I go anywhere but Omaha, and I hadn't even like visited Omaha yet, but over time I had gotten so committed to knowing that Omaha was where I was supposed to be, that when she was like, well, let's just start somewhere different, I remember thinking, if I go anywhere else, it's going to be disobedience. If I even live in Sioux Falls, like I couldn't ride in the car picturing what 5 years in the future would look like in Sioux Falls without getting a knot in my stomach, and I'd think about Omaha and it would make me nervous, but there was a sense of peace about it, which I think is also a really key factor. And anytime that anybody is praying about where God wants them to be, whether it's a job, a city, a type of relationship, whatever it is, if there's peace there, pursue it. And if there's no peace, then leave it. And ask God to put peace where he wants it and take it away where he doesn't. And so, yeah, I made that decision. I stuck to it, moved here. And I remember, as we were winding down in the last few weeks of, preparing to move, I remember thinking in my head, oh man, I wonder when the like, oh crap, what did I do moment was going to hit, or if it'll hit at all. And it did plenty of times after, you plant a church and you go from working at an organization that is thousands of people are involved, and you have all these relationships, to like operating out of basically the garage storage house of a company in a city that you've never been to before. And as far as worship goes, literally just having the two of us with our acoustic guitars and a patch of ambience on my laptop. It was daunting, and it was, at times financially straining, but it was, like you said, 8 years in now, and the hindsight is more than 2020, just on the number of people's lives that we've seen change, the family we've developed here, the friendships we've developed here, the ministry that we've seen God do without paying jobs, even, prior to even working for Meadows. So yeah,
it's a really long and winding road that feels like a lifetime ago at this point. 8 years in the grand scheme of things isn't that much time. And yet when I think back to when we first moved here, I almost feel like it was a different person. I almost feel like it was different, like a different group of people that did that. And now to where we are, not to say that we've arrived by any means, because pursuing Jesus is a constant pursuit and there's no plateau in it. But starting from scratch, considering the fact that we came from a church that was at the peak, 5,000 people, we were both on staff there. We had salaries, like there was stability. I had just had my first kid, and second was about there when we decided we were moving. I'll never forget, I was the most afraid to tell my parents and my brothers that we were moving. I was very, very afraid of that. And of course, I still remember, I can't remember if we all went out to eat at the same time with mom and dad, or if it was me and Bethany that went with mom and dad. I was so nervous. I don't remember all the details, but I just remember after we decided we were moving, I think mom and dad were the first people that we told, because I wanted to make sure that we did that. Or maybe it was you. I don't remember. I don't remember all the details. It's a little fuzzy at this point, but
I remember the night that you told our like family. I don't know if mom and dad knew at that point. Do you remember?
I remember telling you when we were in the gym.
Yeah, we had that whole moment of, hey, just so you know, you were like, Bethany and I are seriously praying about Omaha, and that was after we had the conversation where you were like, I'm gonna have to tell Monty, that I'm gonna have to let him down easy. And at that point, I had also felt the conviction to pray for that. And so I remember being like, it's funny you should say that, but the night that we had our two older brothers over at our parents' house, we did Sunday dinners on a regular basis. And so like all of our nieces and nephews and our parents are there. And I'm thinking like, maybe there's going to be this, hey, everybody, just really quick, wanted to give you guys a heads up on just something that God's been doing in our hearts and that kind of thing. And you didn't do that. You were like, hey, everyone, we're moving to Omaha.
Hey, there's no sense in sugarcoating, No, I think so. I think at that point, mom and dad knew, because when I told our mom and dad that we were moving, which you should understand this is a big deal. Like, we're both major mama's boys and very close with our parents. And so we went to dinner at the golf course restaurant. I can't remember what it was, or the Willows. Yeah. And when we told them, I'll never forget, the first thing my mom said was, well, you have to do what God's telling you to do. And I knew at that moment that if my mom was agreeable to something like this, that, okay, well, God must be behind it, because and there ain't no way there's a stare down between those two happening. No, but in all seriousness, I think that the way that seems so unclear, the way that seems like, well, I'm going to have to tell this person, or I'm going to have to take this risk financially, or I'm going to have to leave my job here and start over here. It's just impossible to know where God's going to take you when you decide, okay, you have my yes. Like, that's the key in all of it. And so we moved to Omaha. We helped start Meadows Church, which has been so fulfilling. And we're seeing so many people come to know Jesus, which is incredible, building an amazing community. And it's not happening because of us. It's happening because of so many people who are buying into what God is doing there. But what do you think is the thing that you're most passionate about in terms of your purpose now? Because we have skills, we have gifts, we have abilities. What is it that you're most passionate about in your purpose right now, as in this season of life, now as a new dad as well?
Yeah, new dad. Shout out Shiloh and Cassie. I'd put it down to a statement, which is I burn for people passionately. Like, I want to help people understand how to passionately pursue God. I want people to have a fire to know God, and that comes out in obviously the handful of ways that, you know, we get to exercise our creativity here through design stuff at church, through songwriting with our church, through developing visual brand type of stuff for our, like, I just want people to be excited about following Jesus. And yeah.
What does that look like to you?
People in particular being excited to follow Jesus. I think for me, what I've seen, or what I maybe even like hope to see, is more and more people excited about the stories of what God is doing. And it doesn't have to always be like, oh my gosh, I prayed for this person and they had cancer and all of a sudden they don't have cancer, you know, like it, down to even literally people just being excited about something that God is revealing to them in the Word, but seeing more and more and more people. Because, you know, we have again, like with the friendships that we've developed here in Omaha, we see that on a regular basis. We've got, you know, we're a part of some really cool circles, but I think that being a sort of liaison or a bridge, or using what God has made me passionate about, what I'm skillful at, to get people excited about, like, the moment to go into prayer with God, or to get people excited to be in worship with a church family, or to get people excited to, like, talk about the Word and talk about in general just what God is doing. I think it looks like that for me. I think that the more that people understand that, like, God ought to be laced, and I mean, yeah, the center for sure, but laced in literally everything that we do, the more excited it makes me. Just because he's always working. His hand, if you allow it, can be in any act of obedience, like we've talked about, that you commit to. And so
I think to go down that vein, it starts with a thought. And I was just listening to a podcast that articulated this so well. It's called the Handlebar Podcast. Definitely recommend checking it out. Podcast. The guy was talking about how these types of things that you're talking about, this passionate pursuit of Jesus, it starts as a thought, and then it goes to a feeling. And sometimes you have to act your way into a feeling, and then those feelings turn into turn into actions. And I thought that was a great progression of it. This thought that we all have of like, well, I want to be more faith-filled. I want to be overflowing with love for the Father. I want to be passionate in worship, or I want to be passionate about prayer. I want to be passionate about reading the Word. It starts with at least thinking that way, and then you have to, a lot of times, act your way into those feelings. Like, there's maybe days where reading the Word is a grind, or where praying is a grind, and it sounds dumb to even say that, because it's a relationship with our Heavenly Father, but I think we resonate with that because it is difficult. It's a discipline, and disciplines are difficult. And so when you spend that time, you invest that time to say, okay, I'm just going to get into the Word today, it becomes something that you do repeatedly, and it becomes something that you eventually you start to love to do, and you start to fall in love with the words, and you start to see the Word differently, and no matter how many times you've read the same scripture over and over again. So I think those types of things, that passionate pursuit, that's something that that's one of the biggest reasons why I think we moved here. Not because we were never trying to get away from anything. We were always trying to follow that voice of God. And I want to ask the question, like, a lot of times it comes up, how do we really know, like, what's God's will? How do we really know if we're hearing from the voice of God? Because I can't say that I've, like when Jesus came up out of the water after he was baptized, God thunders down from heaven. He's like, this is my son. I can't say that I've ever heard God audibly speak to me in that way. And yet it's a different sense that we have, where it's not like you're hearing God necessarily, but you're knowing that he's saying things in certain ways. How would you articulate that, how you know you're in the will of God, or how you know you're hearing from God, as opposed to your own selfish ambition, or your own, like, well, this is my will, and this is what I want, but how do you know you're hearing from God?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the time, like when I'm having conversations like this, I'll think about, like, how do I know my wife? I could get a look from Cassie at a given point and know what she's communicating to me, but that doesn't happen on day 1, or necessarily even day 10 or 20 or 100 or whatever. That comes from days, weeks, months, years of relationship investment. And I think it's the same way with God, between time going to him in prayer, not just to talk to him, but to listen, to have conversation with him, and then obviously knowing his word. Anything that you feel like God might be communicating with you ought to be able to be checked out in some way by his word. And the only way that you get to know his word is by spending time with him in it. And that also is not an overnight, all of a sudden, Rome's not built in a day type of thing. It's a relationship with God is available right now, but it's developed over time. And I think that the sense of being able to hear when he's saying something, the ability to sense his peace on something, or his lack of peace on something, comes over time. And to that point, where you were talking about, sometimes it's a grind. Any relationship it's an investment, right? We'll liken it a lot of the time to working out. Sometimes the actual work is, it takes work, it takes intentionality, but nobody's ever sorry about the result. And in a really similar way, like, there's not every single day reading the word is like, oh my gosh, I filled my page or my notebook with 3 pages of notes of, just downloads that I got from God, or like not all the time spent with God in prayer is like, oh my gosh, like I just felt like God spoke to me, and there was this person, and I went and prayed with, like, those moments will happen, but they're a result of the day-to-day intentional investment in a relationship with him that makes it so it's like, what? Like, I've been here before, in the same way that, like, my wife Cassie could look at me and, if we're in a public setting and I can know what she's thinking, it's like, what? I've been here before, and I get the sense that God might be doing this because he's either done it before, or like I know that his word could validate this, or like I just get this sense of peace that this is what he's wanting or doing or whatever.
I think that's a great analogy to say that it's like, just our human relationships. It takes time, it takes investment, it takes a lot of attention, listening. I mean, you don't get to know somebody by constantly just talking at them or talking, you listen to those people and you learn what they like over time. You learn their rhythms. And I'm glad you brought it up too. Like anything that you feel is this from God or is this from me? It can be checked most of the time, if not all the time, and hopefully all the time with Scripture. And there's a lot of times we do things for selfish gain. There's a lot of times we do things we feel like, man, I'm gonna get out of this situation and try to heal by getting into a new environment. And there may be times that call for getting into new environments, and I think God will lead you to those things. But forcing the issue all the time and constantly, I love the message that Monty preached a handful of years ago about, I think he titled it, my plan for God's will or something like that. And it's just such a great way to put it is that we oftentimes confuse God's will for our will because we're so strongly connected to it. And I think that was one of the biggest reasons why he ended up calling me, and I don't know if you share this thinking, but to Omaha, is because I felt like I was trying to live my own version of, I want to write songs and I want to be known as this great, worship leader, which is like an industry. If you don't know that, it's a big thing. And I want to, grow and be a part of one of the biggest churches because of that status and those sorts of things. I mean, all of those things really entered my mind to the point that I thought that I was doing what God wanted me to do, but it was ultimately really just what I wanted to do, and this person that I felt like everybody wanted me to be. I don't know how much you feel like that was the case for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of disappointment for people that are in ministry, paid or unpaid, is perceived unmet expectations, right? Because, yeah, we both moved here thinking like we're going to, like, let's go take that city, and not necessarily in a comparative way to other churches. It was just like, we were hungry, which is a good thing, but it was about obedience, but we also, I think we saw the shiny trophies on, the other side of the glass, proverbially speaking. And for a while, I think that those things, they were borderline an idol. Still obedience, still walking in something that we believe God was doing, and wanted us to do, but with intentions that inevitably led to a dead end, and ultimately caused for a lot of questions. And God, why do you have us here? And what are you doing? And I think that when your hope is in a result, a lot of the time, then the moments where we would have financial strain become a big strain, because it's I remember sitting in my bedroom, year 1 or 2 of us living here, and without a job, and being like, God, I thought you were the one that wanted me here. It's been several months since I've had work. What are you doing? And pointing a finger at him, because I mean, my heart wanted to please God, but also my heart wanted the result. My heart wanted the worship leader status, or the size of the church, to be able to flex that or not flex it or whatever. And it's an idol, and it's a dead end road.
And humility is the way forward. It really is.
Humility is always the way forward.
Humility is the way forward. I don't know. We don't have to get too deep into the weeds on this, and this is not a woe is me sort of thing, but I mean, moving here was about as big of a culture shock as we could have possibly had. I mean, Bryce and I lived together when we moved here to be able to, share the cost of rent and things like that. We were getting constant financial gifts and blessings from our parents. Our brothers helped us. It was definitely a trying and humbling time of feeling helpless and feeling out of control in many ways. And we also, when we were part of the church in Sioux Falls, we had done the whole setting up the church out of a trailer box and all these sorts of things, setting up the equipment. And we graduated from that into basically, being able to just show up on the weekends. And then coming to Omaha, we started over again. And we were back in the church in a box, setting up everything out of a trailer every single week. There's a lot of that, like you said earlier on, to where it's funny how when you tell God you'll never do something, how oftentimes that might be the very thing that he calls you to. So I want to put it on record that I will never be a millionaire. I will never be a millionaire. That's the case. God, don't, no, I'm joking. But it is kind of funny how you think about those kinds of statements. And I think the I never statements are really statements of lack of self-confidence in many ways. Like, I'll never be able to speak in front of people. I'll never be able to play music in front of people. I'll never be able to get a job at this place, or I'll never be able to get past this part of my past, whatever it may be. I'll never be able to get out of this drug addiction. Nobody will ever trust me in an environment where, I'm serving kids or whatever the case may be. I think it's interesting how God works in that way, to where you feel like, man, I'll never do something, and then all of a sudden, poof, it's like he's like, you know what, I actually am the one who does the qualifying around here.
Well, and I think that we would share, even just based on what you said, I think we'd share this perspective, but a lot of what we were blessed with in the early years of living here, maybe even still, to this day, I would say, was walking through and living through the scenario, like a number of scenarios where we had to depend on God, which, to your point, like in Sioux Falls, really, a lot for a lot of our lives had not been the case, at least when it comes to our jobs, ministry that we did, from youth all the way to, working at the church in Sioux Falls and that kind of thing. And yeah, culture shock is maybe even an understatement, just because, beyond even financial strain, like we started from scratch with all of our relationships from, like, I still to this day, Omaha's a pretty widespread city. I still use GPS most of the places that I go, and being in completely unfamiliar territory. But I think that we were blessed to experience those hardships. Not saying that God, was picking on us by any means, but like we had to. I feel like in order for our ministry to be purified, we had to be humbled. We had to experience what it was like to be, without the safety nets, the lifelines, whatever it might be. And yeah, we were still obviously cared for and tended to by the Lord, through our family, through our parents, through friends that believed in what we were doing, and still to this day believe in what we're doing. But it, time to pay rent comes around, and there's a few tens of dollars in the bank account. It'll challenge whether or not your money literally is where your mouth is when you say that, yeah, I'm fully dependent on God. He's my provider for everything. I had a number of days where, I sat moping in my bedroom because I'm just like, what are you doing, God, or whatever. But like, the reality is, like, I treasure those moments now that, that I'm on the other side for sure. But I also treasure them just because, like, sometimes it takes the actual experience to know and be able to say without a shadow of a doubt, yeah, like I know what it's like to depend on God, and I do depend on Him now. Like, I've been there, I've done that, and I don't want to have to go through the stuff again to learn it more, but it's real.
Yeah, and growth and comfort can't coexist, and we've discovered that in many ways and are still discovering that here today. I'm wondering what you think are most practical takeaways. Obviously, the point of this podcast, if it wasn't clear, was really to talk about taking risks for God and understanding that, man, he's always going to see us through no matter what it is. And no matter how qualified you feel, no matter how unqualified you may feel, God can work miraculously through you. And we're seeing that consistently. The people around us are seeing that consistently. I was just having a text back and forth with our friend Sam, who was talking about how there's something so special about being able to take part in this with like friends that you consider family. It's a different level of bond when you're in the throes of ministry, for lack of a better word, and you're doing what God has called you to do with people that you love. It's a completely different realm to be in, and I do long for that for people. I long for that for everyone out there, because I think so often we get caught up in this, go to school, graduate, go to college, graduate, get a job, have kids, buy a house, put your kids through all that, and then retire, and then what? It's not to say that everybody's life is mundane, but there's something bigger to be part of than just feeling like you've made it in the world's manner of speaking. So what do you think are the practical top takeaways for people that are listening today?
Yeah, I mean, you had a hard hitter, that maybe a lot of people have heard, but it still proves true, is that you can't live your calling in your comfort zone. I'll maybe even add into that, and kind of trailing a little bit back into, the decision-making time for moving here when I was still kind of in my, the period of time where I was praying about whether or not God wanted me here. I remember reading in the New Testament. I should really just know this by now as often as I talk about it, but I can't remember if it was Paul or if it was Peter, and like either one of those guys' entourage of disciples were basically on this tour of presenting the gospel to all these different countries. This is in Acts. And I remember while I was praying about whether or not I needed to be in Omaha, one of the sections I read said that they tried going to Asia to minister to the people there, but the Spirit of Jesus would not let them go there. And it shocked me, obviously, just because, they're not going to do something bad or to go, hurt any people. They're literally going to present the gospel, but the Spirit of Jesus told them no. And I remember thinking, man, if God cares about where I'm not supposed to be, how much more does he care about where I am supposed to be? And I think that, again, it's not that God is like anti-comfort or convenience for some things, right? Like I wouldn't say that, but what I will say is that, even if where you feel like God is calling you to, whether that's like a literal city and place that you are living, or a job, or if it's a relationship or whatever, seek the peace of God, because he will tell you, he will put, like, if you're investing in your relationship with him, he will put a peace on your heart where you are supposed to be and where he needs you to be, and he'll take it away where you don't. The Spirit of Jesus will tell you no at times. Don't just go somewhere or move to a city because there's an awesome job opportunity that's there. Don't, even for people in ministry, we've talked about this before, don't just go somewhere because there's a church that, has a position open for a worship pastor or a creative director or children's pastor. So like, those things are good things, but instead of jumping on just the opportunity, wait on the Lord and wait for him to give you a peace about doing something. I think that if more people that follow Jesus would operate on that basis, on waiting until, this is what I feel like. It might not make sense in my head, but I feel like God is saying I need to do this. Or even if it's like, this makes the most sense, and I know God is drawing me there, and I know that he's pulling me into this, wait on the Lord and be willing to listen and seek his peace, because he'll give it to you. His word promises that.
There's a huge difference between living in sort of the state of ignorance, right? And you think you're doing the right thing, and you don't know that you're doing the wrong thing necessarily, or you might not even be doing the wrong thing, but you might not be 100% sold out to obedience. But there's a difference between ignorance and deliberate disobedience, and so I think that's the big thing, is that when we're being deliberately disobedient to the Spirit of God, we know it in our spirit, and that's the checks and balances that we have to take, is just knowing and understanding that right there. And so do you have anything that you want to say in closing at all, or what's your closing thoughts? What's your send off?
I feel like a lot of what I said was kind of my closing my handlebars.
The handlebar.
The
right.
handlebar.
We can't steal it.
No, we can't. The takeaways. Nothing major other than what I just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really good. And I think that it's important for people to understand these things, because a lot of times we see the other side of what God has done in people. We see Paul, we see Peter. We don't often see Saul. We don't often see Simon. We don't see all those things. We don't see the time that Simon spent as a fisherman all the time. We see the ministry that he did, and that ultimately is what he was called to. But there's a before to everybody's story, right? And so we're so grateful that we get to do this together. Even this sitting here right now is part of it. Enjoying Bryce's espresso machine, and what is this? Espresso
orange bitters espresso tonic.
Orange bitters espresso tonic.
Very
For
delicious.
Anybody that didn't assume the best watching us drink these out of these little cups, that thought we were drinking alcohol on the podcast, it's coffee.
It's coffee.
So, but we're so grateful for every single one of you tuning in and listening today. We appreciate you so much. Wherever and whenever you're listening to this, always feel free, reach out, comment, whatever it may be. We love hearing from you and how you're living out your God-given purpose as well. But until the next episode, we'll see you soon.
And there it is.